So, dear colleagues, members of IFCU, rectors, presidents, vice chancellors, Secretary General of IFCU, dear speakers, participants in the second IFCU New Frontiers Forum. Let me just start by saying welcome to the second New Frontiers Forum for University Leaders organized by the International Federation of Catholic Universities. Under the strange and disconcerting condition of a year of exception as 2020 is. 1 year ago, we initiated in Rome the New Frontiers Forum for University Leaders, an initiative of the International Federation of Catholic Universities focused on engaging members to share experiences and ideas, support strategic development, and boost networking amongst the leaders of the wide and motley network of Catholic universities worldwide. Last year, as this year again, we were able to convene a strong lineup of speakers, both from Catholic universities and outside, from the US and Europe, Asia and Africa, Central and South America, and Oceania. And let me just remind you of a part of the concluding statement in the first forum that was approved in the last day of the conference. We all agreed, and I quote from that statement, that the challenge of our global condition is precisely that of using the tremendous power unleashed by science to move towards ever more inclusive universities and robust societies. This implies a holistic understanding of education and research as instruments to foster a stage of equilibrium within and without. And as institutions, we pledge to productively work to build stronger coalitions between universities and societies without fear of looking ahead. And so, without fear of looking ahead, we convene 1 year on under pandemic conditions to discuss not fiction, but reality. The social, political, ethical, and academic realities of artificial intelligence and its impact on universities. This is not a topic emerging in the near future, but a reality we all already inhabit. So why discuss yet again the splendor and misery of AI? What novelty will enter the world with the discussions prompted by the strong lineup of speakers of this year's forum over this 2-day virtual conference? Well, the answer is perhaps simple, as most great things are. The brave new world of artificial intelligence cannot become a sleepwalker's experience for passive humans, nor can its impact and development be the privilege of robotics experts. When mathematician Norbert Wiener coined the term cybernetics in 1941, from the Greek kybernan, meaning to steer, navigate, and govern, he was clearly announcing a stage of societal development when autonomous machines that could learn faster than humans would be able to lead and govern human affairs. The discussions which followed at the MIT lab where he pursued his work were split between utopian optimism and fearful pessimism. 68 years on, this fictional future has become a living present. But we do not simply accept to be led and governed by machines. And yet the human life world has become a switch on, switch off universe from the time we wake up, the organization of our life, from calendars to heartbeats. According to a Cisco study, when they come to university, students carry on average 7 different devices, from computers to smartphones, a collection of wearables, tablets, and so on. And all of them are powered or use artificial intelligence or machine learning. AI is supporting medical diagnostic and the accuracy of treatment. It leverages national security decisions, steers societal organization, monitors climate, and it also has the power to boost or suppress democracy, to control freedom, limit individual rights and choices. The question is this fair? How far are we ready to go? Is there agency in the algorithm? Who rules in the black box society? Universities are at the forefront of societal development, and they both steer the technological issues that have led to the rise of machines, just as they are affected and disrupted by that same development. And recently, COVID has become a powerful accelerator of this change, both in instrumental and strategic terms. Common wisdom tells us that a crisis is more often than not also an opportunity. The pandemic has challenged our pedagogical models, our modes of scholarly collaboration. We are living a watershed moment when institutions rethink what they do, how they do it, the new constituents they serve, and their future needs. If there was anything that could be considered obvious in the current predicament, then it was that at least one generation was prepared for the brave new world of remote work and virtual socializing, and for an AI-steered organization of the social. The millennial generation, or those I prefer to call Generation 4.0, born and raised amongst screens and wearables, virtual environments have almost become a second skin. But is it really so? COVID has made pedagogical innovation resisted if taught or imposed, and many of us have certainly had this experience at their universities. So when it was imposed before COVID, there was resistance to, let's say, from online teaching to technological driven education. So let's say that COVID has made pedagogical innovation into the new normal. And this is the nature of academia, ready to resist any directive from leadership, but always available to deal with hazard and find solutions. This is, after all, what science is about. And yet there is complexity in this picture. Driven by an unexpectedly rapid change or by confinement, some students are growing anxious about the technological environment. The lack of face-to-face interaction that this generation understood as their trademark is now boosting depression and anxiety. Students are savvy in the use of technology, but they need the human touch. And we are still anthropologically geared towards unmediated empathy. At Facebook, for instance, company culture stresses that face-to-face meetings and personal interaction are key to the company's success. Arguably, we are not wired for social distancing. At a time of key decisions for universities about their educational and governance models, it is wise to recall that technology, and most specifically AI-induced developments, must be drivers of a movement towards a better, and I would add, more humane future. Powered by AR and AI, the defining traits that will make the institution boom or bust will continue to be the quality of the interaction between the community of scholars and learners. And this interaction may be unavoidably wired, but the wire will not define the quality of the interaction. Let me thank this year's amazing speakers for generously having accepted our invitation to share their immense expertise with IFCU members. We are proud to have arrayed global thought leaders in AI and social robotics, ethicists, and truly world-class leaders with whom it is a privilege to discuss the road ahead. I also wish to thank, on behalf of us all, the IFCU team, and most especially Corinne Meyeul, for making this virtual forum a successful reality. Thank you all for your presence, and let's begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. As the moderator of the first panel, it is my privilege first to thank you, Isabel, for your welcoming address, and to welcome the participants to the first panel, the contributors. We will have three contributions. The first one from Professor Arlindo Oliveira from the Instituto Superior Técnico de Lisbon, Portugal. Then we'll have Reverend Dennis Holtschneider, the president of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities, USA. And then we'll have Dr. Lope Hugo Barreiro Solano, Dean of the Engineering Department of Pontificia Universidad Javeriana de Bogotá. But first, we are going to listen to Professor Arlindo Oliveira, who is a distinguished professor of Instituto Superior Técnico in Lisbon, Portugal, and a member of the Portuguese Academy of Engineering. He obtained his BSc and MS degrees in electrical engineering and computer science from the Instituto Superior Técnico and his PhD degree from the University of California, Berkeley, as a Fulbright scholar. He was a researcher at the CERN, the Electronic Research Laboratory of UC Berkeley, and Berkeley Cadence Laboratories. He authored 3 books and more than 150 articles in the areas of algorithms, machine learning, bioinformatics, computer architecture. He's past president of INESCID, the Portuguese Association for Artificial Intelligence, and Instituto Superior Técnico. So without further waiting, Arlindo, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the lengthy introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank Isabel for the invitation and all of you for your time and attention. My objective here is to talk a little bit about what is my view on the not so immediate future of AI and how it will develop in relation with the pandemic that we are living, and that has changed so many things. We have to keep in mind to start that AI, even though it is now very popular, is a field with quite a long history already. So AI pretty much started in the middle of the 20th century, has about 70 years today, maybe with the pioneering ideas of Alan Turing, who was the first to explicitly write that computers, if duly programmed, could behave intelligently like a human being. He even put a time frame for that, some 70 years in the future, computers will be indistinguishable from, computer intelligence will be indistinguishable from human thought in some respects. We know now that he was a bit too optimistic, maybe too optimistic, but still it's interesting that he made such a prediction such a long time ago. In these 7 decades, we have learned a lot about intelligence, both the artificial and the human sort. Maybe the most important thing we learned is that human intelligence and even animal intelligence in many respects is something very, very complex and very hard to reproduce and to program. And I think in this modern half a century, we got a new understanding and a new respect for intelligence, in the sense that it's something that has evolved for hundreds of millions of years, and it will not be so easy to reproduce. This is in partly due to what is known as the Moravec's paradox, and is due to the fact that in this time we found out that some things that are very hard for humans to do, like play chess at world level game, or make demonstrations of mathematical theorems, turned out to be fairly easy for computers to do and programs to do. But things that we do very easily, like talk and understand spoken language, or recognize faces, or recognize scenes, or drive a car, are actually very hard for computers to do. This is so-called Moravec's paradox. Hard things are easy for computers, and easy things are hard for computers. Very recently, in the last 10 years maybe, we have been able to address a little bit of Moravec's paradox, in the sense that we are now, for the first time, able to do some of these things that we were unable to do for a long time, despite many, many efforts. When you pick up a cell phone, or a modern cell phone, and you unlock it by when it looks at your face in different lighting conditions and different aspects, we are actually using a technology that would have been completely impossible to program just 10 years ago. So face recognition will be totally impossible to program just 10 years ago. And the fact that now we have millions of people literally using almost every second gives us an idea on how far we have evolved in these 10 years. This is a consequence of the combination of 3 factors. One is that there are lots of data that can be used to train systems. These systems learn to work by using a technique called machine learning. The fact that we have much, much faster computers today, and in particular we have the so-called graphics processing units or GPUs that enable us to train these complex systems. And also there are some new algorithms, but actually the algorithms are not as new as that. Most of these algorithms have been known for almost half a century, and they have just been slightly improved. But the convergence of these factors, this data, better computers, and better algorithms has been making us able to imagine creating machines that drive a car, that recognize faces, that interact with us in spoken conversation, and so on. And in this respect, Alan Turing's vision of 70 years ago is actually somewhat coming to fruition, because several of these things that we consider so unique to human, like talking, are actually becoming possible now and will become even more common in the next decade or so. So you were at this fairly happy in our life as researchers and engineers developing new systems when the pandemic hit. And the pandemic changed a lot of things. One thing was that I think is clear to everyone is that the digital transformation that we were already undertaking got sped up by a large factor. So we probably advanced 10 years in just 6 months. Just this idea of having a remote workshop by Zoom, setting this up just 1 year ago would have been a nightmare. People didn't have Zoom installed, didn't know how to use it, and certainly will not imagine doing something like this just by sending a few emails. At the minimum, we'll set up a big project with technicians working with remote systems and so on. This, of course, has some as positive impact that our lives got somewhat easier in what respects. We don't have to travel around to another city or even to the other side of Lisbon to have a meeting. We are able to do much faster things that will still take us a while only 1 year ago. Of course, it also has a number of negative effects. Being here in a Zoom, nice as it is, in a Zoom meeting, nice as it is not even vaguely comparable to being in person. And I think a lot of people are suffering from this lack of human contact that we observe. So going now straight to the question, so how is this changing the development of artificial intelligence? I tend to take the long view. Computers and AI have been here for the better part of a century now, 70 years, as I said. We already had pandemics during this period. We had 2 pandemics very similar to this one in 57 and one in 68. Nobody really remembers them, but they killed between 1 and 3 million people in a population that was much smaller than today. So I think the overall impact of those pandemics is actually fairly similar to this one. And even though COVID has somewhat slightly more drastic results in healthy-wise, but my view is actually that it will not cause a deep change in the way AI has been developing and will develop in the future. It will change us. So we will be able to use these new digital techniques much better. I think it accelerated us. The pandemic certainly accelerated us humans in the digital direction. But the development of artificial intelligence is actually very, very, very difficult to do, which means that we will not be able to make radical changes in the technology in the 1 or 2 or even 3 years that the pandemic will be with us. I don't think in the long run, this short period where the pandemic was acute will be remembered as especially relevant for AI. However, it is changing a few things. So, as I said, having data is one of the things that AI systems need to be developed. And these Zoom meetings, I don't know if this one is being recorded or not, but now with all this distance interaction, it turns out that we'll have lots and lots and lots of data to train AI systems. So things that were hard, like translation, language understanding, and so on, this will be a panacea. So this will speed up all the components of AI that need data to be trained. The other thing is a little bit on the other way around. So AI techniques, I think, will also be very important in letting us understand this pandemic. It doesn't look so much today, right? Just 6 months after the pandemic started, we still know very little about it, even though there are probably tens of thousands of articles written on the subject. But I think in a couple, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, when the dust settles, I think we'll be able to use AI to analyze much better exactly what happened in the pandemic, why it was so serious in some places and not so serious in other places, and so on. I make a reference here to a study by The Economist, which came out 2 weeks ago, which is basically the application of AI techniques to the data we have, to the tests that have been, to the seroprevalence tests that were applied, and that leads to the conclusion that the first wave was actually much worse than we tend to believe, because many of the cases went underreported. And the second wave, which looks much worse than the first in some cases when you look at it today, at least here in Portugal, Spain, probably France, Italy, and so on. And the second wave is probably not as bad as it looks, because we are now testing much more, and possibly the second wave is even less serious than the first one. Of course, only time will tell. This is just a model, and models fail. But the application, The Economist made a very interesting application of data analysis of artificial intelligence techniques to help us understand the real evolution of the pandemic by not only believing in the tests that were made, but also the people that were ill but did not make tests. Finally, there is a strong, I think there is another area where AI will be pushed forward by the pandemic, which is, we understood that in several businesses are very fragile because they depend critically on people that may be forced to stay at home or may even become unable to work. So the push to automate specific functions in many businesses will be very strong, because we now have systems that can replace humans effectively in a number of functions, like answering calls in a call center, even doing call screening for emergency calls and stuff like that. So, and of course, health-related calls. So I do believe that business in particular will look more carefully at AI techniques, and will try to replace more people by automatic systems that, of course, do not suffer from viruses like SARS-CoV-2. And I think this will also be a strong economic incentive to develop faster this sort of systems that will be able to replace humans in specific functions. As for the third, I usually tend to classify AI in 3 large areas. One of them is data analysis, data science. I already talked a little bit about that. The second one is this ability of AI to replace human functions. We can replace people in call centers, but also radiologists and cardiologists by analyzing automatically the medical images, vehicle drivers by automating driving, and so on. So, in the third area of AI is this long-term objective of developing more and more development systems that are more and more capable in what they do. In the end, we may be able to develop, in a future that is still distant, so-called artificial general intelligence, which are systems that will be so flexible, creative, and able as humans. And of course, if we ever manage to do that, as I said, it's a long-term perspective, we'll have to consider the fact that society will have interactions between humans and these smart systems that at some point will be almost like humans, and at some points undistinguishable from humans, as Alan Turing predicted 70 years ago. I think this particular challenge will not be strongly affected by the pandemic. As I said, it's a long-term challenge that people have been working on it for the better part of a century. I don't think it is 1 or 2 years of the pandemic that will make big change here. But in the part of data analysis and helping us understand the pandemic, I myself have a project on this. And on the part of using AI to replace humans in specific jobs, which may be more economically efficient and less risky, I think in those two components, AI will change due to pandemic, and will also change the pandemic in a way because it will enable us to understand the actual course of the disease, and hopefully help us healthcare professionals and politicians also decide what is the best course of action to address this. And we know it's very difficult to decide the best course of action. We may, in general, politicians in the society may tend to be very, very conservative and advocate things like lockdown or so on. But I think the careful analysis of the data may open the way for procedures that are not as drastic and may enable us to live some reasonably normal life while the virus is still with us. And this is mostly what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Arlindo Oliveira. I will just remain 4 points about what you relevantly presented today. Especially it was very challenging because you were the first contributor to our forum. First, you underlined the paradox AI was just presenting. And in a sense, I will just translate it into a few further questions about, indeed, we are able to do more what was not possible before. But then it raises the question, especially nowadays, about too many users, too many available informations, and sometimes too fast a system, which raises the fundamental questions addressed by the IFCU's president about what remains of the place of the human being in there. These questions you also touched with the impact of the pandemic, with the advantages and the negative effect. But as you mentioned about what the possibilities on the short term about the pandemic, that it will probably help us analyze deeper the present pandemic situation. But it also reveals some vulnerabilities when, for instance, you underlined the possibility in some businesses of human function being replaced by possible artificial intelligence. But then it raises the question in the long term about, and that is fundamental, something probably will be further addressed, not only this afternoon, but also tomorrow, about which kind of relationship between AI development and human intelligence at the same time. So once again, Arlindo, thank you very much. It is now my pleasure, and I say real pleasure, to introduce Reverend Dennis Holtschneider, which I had the pleasure to meet during the last IFCU meeting in Washington last January. That was before, as I can say. Dennis Holtschneider is a prominent in the field of Catholic higher education. He began his tenure as IFCU president on July the 1st, 2019. He also served as president of DePaul University in Chicago, the nation's largest Catholic university, from 2004 to 2017. Quite a challenge indeed, Dennis. A frequent speaker, consultant and writer on issues facing colleges and universities. Dennis served on the boards of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, the American Council on Education, and IFCU, which he chaired from 2010 to 2012. He currently chairs the Niagara University Board of Trustees and the Institute of Advanced Catholic Studies at the University of Southern California. And now, Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pierre. It's a pleasure to see you again, and a pleasure to be with all of you. Good day. And thank you for this invitation. I've spent, as you heard, much of my life in Catholic higher education, but I've also spent time in Catholic healthcare, where 3 years ago, I was responsible to stand up a new company called Agilify. You'll find it online. And now that company is the USA's largest AI advisory services company. And ironically, it's within a Catholic healthcare system that US's largest AI advisory company exists. The company supports AI for healthcare, but also international banks, insurance companies, aero systems, energy providers, pharmaceutical companies, logistics, and even Coca-Cola. I share that because I have a very specific take on artificial intelligence, and it's important that I start by defining the term as I use it. When I use the term today, I'll be speaking of intelligent automation, which is really 3 sets of activity. It's robotic process automation, it's data analytics and visualization, and it's machine learning with correlation and causation insights. In short, seeing and reporting patterns that might actually mean something. This morning, let me share with you how AI has entered into US higher education, and then how I think it's going to change because of COVID-19. But I'll be speaking about its adoption and its use, not its scientific development. I am not an engineer, and I'm privileged today that there are engineers on this panel who can speak to that topic. So I'll be speaking about its adoption and its use. AI has already entered into US higher education in a number of ways. You'll see it doing task automation. So it's replacing human labor with electronic processing. So we can now do all of our government reports using AI. Human beings don't need to generate government reports. We can do internal management reports using AI. We can do class enrollment, which was a heavily person-intensive task. We can do that using AI, including the planning for class enrollment as patterns are noticed, et cetera, and anticipated. And now we can do student advising using this technology, which was always a very faculty-intensive program, and that allows faculty to do the higher levels of student advising rather than the lower levels of what classes they should take, et cetera. So our first category that we're using is for task automation. The second category we're currently using it for is for compliance and risk mitigation. We can prevent human mischief. We can catch irregularities quickly, and we can create a culture of compliance because we now have an indelible record of their activity by their emails, their calendar, their phone calls, and we can tie that all together. We can catch activity as it's happening. We can now monitor everything rather than a sample when it comes to financial activity and purchasing decisions. And we can monitor organizational activity in real time rather than looking back in the rearview mirror through an audit a year later. All of that allows us to do compliance and risk mitigation in our organizations. AI has also enabled us to improve services. Now, there are many, many examples here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but allow me to give you 4 brief ones. You can take heating and cooling of all your buildings, and that can be tied to the weather conditions and tied to the anticipated classroom and building use, et cetera. It's an improved way to manage your plant. We can use blockchain for student credentials and for protecting the research rights of our faculty while simultaneously sharing their research freely. It's a really lovely little way to do that. We can take chatbots that mine student questions and effectively answer the students' inquiries so that the students actually think a human being is responding to their needs when it's a computer that has figured out the most often asked questions and answers them more accurately than human beings do. And we can even use chatbots for retention, to send out text to keep students feeling they're connected, to improve summer melt, et cetera. So we can improve our services using the technology. We also use the technology currently for data mining for potential students, for recruiting, but also for current students. So we we can improve the targeting of potential students by tracking their interactions on institutional websites, social media posts, how quickly they open their emails, whether they click on included links. We can track all of it. And then we can figure out which students to reach out to, which aspects of campus life we should emphasize with them, and we can assess their admission applications. Seton Hall is one of our Catholic universities. I'm sure you've heard of it. They track 80 different variables on potential students as they're looking across the United States for new students. Some universities actually do many more than 80. But we can also data mine for current students. We create early warning systems now where we can have our computers analyze a wide array of data, whether it's their academic performance, non-academic involvements, to identify students who are at risk of failing or dropping out or having perhaps mental health issues. Traditionally, a university might use a couple of blunt factors like GPA or attendance to assess whether a student is at risk. AI software can have a much more granular pattern of information for student behavior for real-time, up-to-the-minute assessment of student risk. We even can incorporate data like if the student stops going to the cafeteria for lunch, because we can tell they haven't swiped their card in some time. We can watch data on how often they visited the library, if there's a change of pattern, or the gym, or student services. And we can track and see if there's a change that we should attend to in a student's life. We also use AI, for creating personalized learning experiences using adaptive learning technologies and gamification. So this allows students to advance at their own pace and schedules. It addresses learning style differences in the same classroom. It addresses having both advanced and remedial students in the same classroom. It provides professors a way to evaluate student learning more exactly. And it frees professors for higher level functions. We have found that adaptive learning technologies are more effective for knowledge transfer courses. So introductory language acquisition is better taught with this technology than with a human professor. Anatomy, art history, introductory accounting. If the course has heavy knowledge transfer, it's very effectively delivered without a human being actually teaching the course day to day using this technology. But this technology has turned out not to be very effective for higher level learning. If you're using Bloom's taxonomy, you can't help students use information in new situations, or draw connections among ideas, or justify a stand or a decision, or produce new or original work. Those still take human interaction. And of course, lastly, we're using AI to assess student learning. So besides automated testing, we can actually use facial scan technology to watch and whether they are actually understanding and paying attention to what they're learning, or if their face is showing confusion. And that's all the more effective now that our classes are on Zoom. But we can also use chat room language scans. When we put students into chat rooms, we can use that technology to examine all the conversations at once and give us a quick read on where a faculty member needs to actually get involved. We can assess the student learning in real time using this technology. This is not the future, this is now. But the challenge, of course, is adoption. And it's not broadly adopted yet, but there are examples of this everywhere throughout the practice in the US. So here comes my theory on COVID and how COVID will change all of this. And that's, the future is already here. COVID is simply speeding up its adoption. In the US, obviously, we went last spring from 35% of our students in the United States taking at least one online course to pretty much 100% because of COVID. And so close to the same is true for our faculty. Faculty, whether they were teaching that modality, have now learned how to teach on that modality. In addition, however, if you look at enrollment this fall, using government statistics in the United States, what you will see is enrollment has dropped everywhere in the country at all the traditional universities, except for the online providers. Their enrollment has gone up nearly 7% in the United States, just over the summer. That's spring to fall difference. In addition, if you look at US government numbers for this fall, you will see that the number of students in the United States studying for an undergraduate degree has dropped 4% as a nation. Students had just opted out of going to college at all this fall and just taken a break, a gap year as we call it. And traditional graduate degrees are up slightly, as they often are when people are unemployed in the United States. But what's up notably across the country are post-baccalaureate certificates. Those are up 7.5% nationwide, and that's just from spring to fall. Now, that's the future. And AI is already making inroads in the idea of credentialing instead of degrees when it comes to education. And of course, you in Europe are aware of a program called Flexa. We don't know it here in the US yet, as an example of a technology as designed to help you keep you learning by recommending credentials and certification opportunities that are attended to your field. In addition, the financial challenges that have been brought by COVID. So our higher education has experienced extensive government cuts of our funding of these universities, both public and private, Catholic as well. Loss of philanthropy, our donors are donating less. In the United States, that's a large source of income for us. And a lowered ability to pay tuition for the students because their families have lost jobs. All three of those financial challenges are now incentivizing universities to adopt AI solutions that save them money. It's actually pushing them towards the technology instead of pulling away where it makes sense to help them operate. It's also has the opportunity, because of this, instead of having a difference between online providers and traditional providers, it's now bringing traditional providers more into the field and merging the two, so that you'll see with their strong and admired brands, more of the traditional universities are now starting to become sources of this kind of education, whether it's blended hybrid, blended learning, online, AI, etc. We're also seeing the speed to deploy increasing. That won't surprise you at all, but that marker is increasing across the U.S. for employing these technologies. And this is going to have another effect, I think, and other writers think as well. I think all of this is going to expand greatly the availability of higher learning to populations that didn't have that availability. That was already the case, but the speed with which this is being adopted is going to make that increasingly available. It's also blurring the differences between what we call secondary education, that's students who are about age 14 to 18, and university education that happens from 18 forward. It's now starting to blur because the younger students are beginning to take college classes while they're still in their younger educational system. And it's no longer you do one, then you do the other, but the two are starting to come together because it's so easy to do that. And then finally and lastly, this is obvious, many of our curricular offerings have to either change or we have to accept that their enrollments are going to change. And so obviously the way you teach medical diagnostics now is going to change, but also legal systems, also transport and logistics, all of those are AI driven. But even auditing, students would come to us to learn to be business professionals as auditors, but that field is largely going to go away at the practical level, that there's no longer a need to sample universities and sample for auditing purposes. auditors just come in and say, give me access to everything, and their computer systems can run literally all the data for the year to find the irregularities. And then you create auditors for the higher level functions. And you create people for the audit function who understand the data analytics, the audit analytics, the knowledge of statistics, the technical skills in ERP and programming. But it's going to change how we prepare auditors. And that's true for many, many, many fields. And so AI is forcing how we teach and what we teach to shift. So that's really, to my mind, COVID is not changing the trajectory of higher education's change. The technology is doing that, but it's speeding up its adoption. Colleges and universities that thought they might wait and watch to see how things will develop will now feel pressured to adopt these changes sooner, with the risk that they will be left behind if they don't. In the United States, at least, that appears to be the pattern and the lesson. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise, for this very thoughtful presentation, which is indeed complementary to Arlindo's presentation, because you address more indeed on the adoption and use of AI in higher education. Definitely, it is stimulating because it raises questions. For instance, one of the questions which might be further debated this afternoon or tomorrow is, how far is this adoption and use changing the teaching mission of the academics and the relationship between the academics and students? Definitely, as you raise this, for instance, the use, for instance, on the compliance monitoring or services improvement, etc. Indeed, it seems to be that AI is, if I may be provocative, invading the system, which raises at least three questions. Is it to be further adopted? Is it to be further developed? And or is it to be corrected? In one sentence, how can we keep control on the process in order to make it more humanly adaptable and acceptable? You also raises the impacts of the current pandemic, and I do agree with what you said about the fact that indeed it was really an an incentive to further use it. So definitely, that was a very complimentary introduction that you made. Thank you very much, Denise. And now we are turning to the last but not least presenter of this afternoon, Dr. Lope Hugo Barrero Solano. Dr. Hugo Barrero Solano is industrial engineer from the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana, Bogota, Colombia. He holds a master's degree and a doctor of environmental health sciences from Harvard University, USA. Is a professor of the Department of Industrial Engineering of the School of Engineering at Javeriana University in Bogota, Colombia. He's a researcher in the area of ergonomics and human factors. Currently, he serves as Dean of the School of Engineering at Javeriana University. Without further waiting, Lope, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Vercauteren. I'm going to share oh, I think I was taking away my permissions.
No, it's all right. It's all right. We can see you and hear you.
Oh, but I would like to share screen, if possible.
Okay. Maybe Loic can do something about this. Loic, I think we have something like.
Oh, I think now I can. Yes.
Okay, please.
I think you're seeing right now my
your slide, your PowerPoint, yes.
Yes, thank you. I would like to start by thanking the International Federation of Catholic Universities for this invitation to Pontificia Universidad Javeriana in Bogota to be part of this great forum, and to Dr. Corinne Melul for all the organization efforts. Special greetings also to Professor Oliveira, Father Denise Holtschneider, and Professor Pierre Vercauteren. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. Thank you very much, and greetings to all the participants. I have this picture is a picture of our new lab In Bogota, it's 14,000 square meters, really nice labs that we hope to be able to use soon. We are using it very scarcely these days. I have entitled this presentation, The Pause We Need to Review the Paradigms of Artificial Intelligence Development. We all have learned about the great potential and risks of artificial intelligence. Nobody can, however, predict with certainty how the current pandemic will speed up, reduce or modify the development of artificial intelligence, the use of all its potential, or the magnification of all its risks. In a very simple view, one could say that we need more than ever the advance in technology so that we can come up with faster solutions. Perhaps faster development of vaccines. We are already seeing examples of this, or other means of control for these and other pandemics to come. Perhaps better means to implement rapidly all kind of worldwide coordinated efforts in sectors such as health, transport, migration control, and communications. Therefore, we can expect that several areas of science and technology, including, of course, AI, will grow at a faster rate, as it has been the case in other times when cultures, nations, or the society have been put under stress. I think, however, that what the pandemic has mainly pointed out is the need to review how we live, how we make business, and how vulnerable we are as human beings. It has pointed out weaknesses of our current way of making decisions as a global society, and the great inequalities we continue having in spite of all our development and knowledge. Therefore, one can also expect that the current pandemic will allow a pause to think about what we do with artificial intelligence, how we do it, and what the purpose of it is. This is perhaps the main message that I want to transmit today. Let's consider one person who has dedicated a good deal of his lifetime to develop AI algorithms, which has allowed herself become recognized, become a millionaire, or become an important influencer of people's lives. The pandemic has shown that it can be harsh on persons with specific risk factors, but also that it can gravely affect, with some degree of randomness, anybody. No matter if it is a president, sportsman, scientist, a worker, a company owner, or an artist, there is a risk. This person understands that the consequences have been more devastating among folks with fewer resources, and perhaps feels privileged for this. Is there any chance this person feels also that more needs to be done for others? Is there a chance that this person realizes that all that recognition, money, or power really does not matter when there are great threats to humankind? Is there a chance that this person realizes that AI, in a very different way, of course, the same technology that has given this person recognition, money, or power, can be a threat for himself, his family, and humanity? More importantly, is there a good chance that not just one person, but we all, as part of a global society, realize of this? Just in case, I'm not proposing that we stop AI developments or that it's even feasible to do it out of a sudden massive attack of consciousness. Perhaps there will come a day that humans will need to make that kind of choices. I cannot say that. What I'm saying is that we need to take the time and pause and think of what we want to do with AI. And the pandemic offers us this possibility with a unique perspective. I would like to take the opportunity then to reflect on 3 ideas that many of us used to decide on whether or not to develop new technologies, which can be analyzed in the context of AI. The first idea is technology is neutral. What matters is what we do with it. I think we all hear this in all kinds of scenarios. The second idea, if technology benefits overcome technology risks, we can continue. And the third idea, and perhaps a controversial one, says if we place limitations to the use of artificial intelligence, we need to balance off these limitations against the loss of competitiveness due to such limitations. This is actually a message that you can read between lines in the white paper of the European Union released in February this year. To me, they sound fair at first. However, in a current situation, in a moment of pause, I'm not sure I'm okay with all of us, at least not completely. I can understand the idea of technology being neutral, but not as an excuse to avoid questions about the consequences of it, whether those consequences are intended or not. I will explain myself. I would not be okay with a researcher saying, for example, I solved a huge problem for our society. I did my part. Now other people should do theirs and be concerned about other potential uses of the technology I created. I can also understand that every time we make a decision, every time we make choices, there are pros and cons. And we need to somehow make up a system to weight factors and decide. It looks like this. If the benefits of using a technology surpass the potential damages, we go ahead. Nevertheless, we all understand that there is so much uncertainty in this equation and that it depends on how we look at things and make the count. It may be well that all becomes a matter of who presents the best arguments or who has the most economically powerful arguments. This connects with the third idea. It appears that our current world economic system is all about competition. The development of the vaccine for COVID-19 is the latest salient example of it. There is a competition among persons, among companies, among universities, among nations. I think competition has been present throughout our history as humans, as part of survival and as means to live better than others. Therefore, we need to ask how much we are willing to risk by using artificial intelligence in order to be first in the competition for a new product, a new market, or a new ranking. I would say that it is not possible to make something significantly good for all of us with the current state of affairs, our current way of living and thinking. I think that a society that rewards highly single ideas that are capable of producing millions for a few, even if it produces benefits for many, will not really take us so far as a society. Please consider now the following. Some of the firms producing a great deal of the advances that make our lives easier, please observe my screen, easier, using artificial intelligence are the same making large amounts of money out of their inventions. Is this a contradiction or is it just a necessary condition for breakthroughs to happen? Many people will say it's only fair that those helping a lot are paid in large amounts. But of course, we can open all sorts of debates about what it means to help a lot and whether the large amounts should be somehow limited. I wonder if this system we are in, which fundamentally rewards with millions the good ideas, is all there is. I am not at all against paying well to smart people doing good things. However, is it possible that we manage as a society to reduce the economic incentive, even just a little, in favor of teaching people about the greatest reward of all, the satisfaction that we all can get by showing solidarity for our fellow citizens of the world. If we want to move ahead with this fundamental change, I see no other option but to strengthen and improving our ethics education. I am not here talking necessarily about courses. I am talking here about education about fundamental values that can be imprinted in our children since very early in life, and that are so fundamental that can be accepted by everybody. Education that rewards those that are willing to help for the sake of helping. This is what we all try to do every day, but I don't think we think a lot or enough, or we don't emphasize enough the key part that this idea represents. And I know I'm talking here to the right people. So the problem is how do we do this when we don't talk to the right people? If we want to move ahead with this fundamental change, I see no other option to strengthen than improve education. I share some of these thoughts with one of the most respected faculty members at Javeriana University. And he said, this is all so idealistic. I could not help feeling frustration with this honest comment. Then suddenly I had a second idealistic thought. What if it's not idealistic? What if it's just a huge challenge? And if it is a huge challenge, we need to ask ourselves first, what is the current state of affairs in ethics education? And what difference is it making in our lives? How the current pandemic can give us a little push that we need to think more deeply and consciously about these issues. I'm not sure how effective we are being regarding ethics education as a global society and at different levels of education. I can ask though to you and to myself, how good we are doing in our own schools in this front. It is a hard question to ask and to respond, but I will say for now that perhaps one simple metric we can all go about is how much effort, for example, in a school of engineering, we dedicate to develop technology, and comparatively, how much effort we put into assessing or foreseeing its impacts. Is it equally likely that one of our faculty would lose a night of sleep thinking on how to make a more efficient algorithm than thinking on how his algorithm could be poorly used by others? I think we all need to care, and the pandemic allows us some perspective and pause to ponder these delicate topics. To move forward, I think we need to start with further awareness. Awareness provides us with mechanisms to push ourselves and to press policymakers. It appears, judging by recent attempts to create laws in the European Union, for example, that a basic sense of awareness is already among us. However, this will not replace the fundamental effort to make a change in the hearts of the new generations. We do not want people pondering the effects of artificial intelligence because they could get in jail, but because they want to do well. Ethics education will give us a chance that one day, decisions in private organizations, in academics, and in governments will prioritize human dignity beyond the competitiveness among companies and among nations. I certainly do not see this happening anytime soon, but that does not mean we should not try. On the contrary, we should try harder. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lupo Ego Barrero Solela. You definitely further stressed the ethic dimension of all debates, and that was very relevant because indeed you crossed some issues already raised directly or indirectly by the two preceding contributors. I'm just raising one is the issues of inequalities, which was indeed also underlined by Dennis Holtschneider, even during the pandemic. I mean, it stressed the inequalities between those directly involved in the emergency management of the crisis and those left behind. And there is in between a third category, who is just trying to see how are we living in these conditions. You also stressed three basic ideas, which were indeed forming the structure of your ethical approach. But I think it raises again the fundamental question of how is it possible to get back AI under control? And indeed, it is a deep debate between how and why. And certainly these kind of questions are going to bounce back, not only this afternoon, but also tomorrow. Before opening the debate to the rest of the audience, I would like to ask if one or the other panelists would like to raise some remark or questions to any other panelist. I don't know, Dennis, Arlindo, yes, please. Just Joe, please. Could you just wait? I would like to ask Arlindo or Dennis or Lope if there's a question to or a remark to the other.
Just one quick note, really.
Yes, please, Arlindo.
The fact that there were a number of things that were referred by the other panelists that I sometimes also refer, but I will just focus on the question of inequality. I think as technology evolves, globalization moves forward, and AI enables companies to make business using less and less people. I think the issue of inequality and income distribution is a very important. Income is not just related to AI, I think is related to digitalization in general, technology in general. I think AI makes it a very, very serious issue. I mean, if we sometime in the future are indeed able to produce, to create more and more economic value involving less and less persons, then we should think very, very carefully about the redistribution of economic income, because it may become one of the most, if it's not already, it may become one of the most serious issues in the future.
Thank you very much, Arlindo. John Pedro, please, you wanted to intervene. Could you please introduce yourself for the rest of the audience?
Hi, I'm Pedro Simas. I'm the new head of research in the medical school that was just approved recently at Católica University in Portugal. And I have a question that always interested me to Arlindo Oliveira, if I may. We heard in the welcome address the situation of putting the agent in AI. And we know how difficult it is to encode or codify human values, because they are different between individuals, because they are always changing, and because there is uncertainty about the values. We question the values all the time. And now with the advent of AGI, artificial general intelligence, and I think in my view and of many, the reinforced learning is something which is getting closer to general intelligence. And I wonder, and the question is, how would, if you were in a cybernetic future where AI was controlling in some aspects of human behavior and decision, a reinforced learning system, would it have dealt with the pandemic in a different way? In the sense that if the goal was to optimize humankind and not put in jeopardy human extinction, would they look and decide to protect the risk groups as we are doing it with complete lockdowns and other strategies, or would they overlook some of these ethical issues and would just say, well, the risk group is not important and therefore society has to move on, and we just you don't have an option, you just have to deal with it. And so it's a general question, but it's a provocative question. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, John. Pedro, Arlindo, would you like to answer first, and then Dennis and Lope?
Yes, I think I may go first because it directed directly to me. But thank you, Pedro, for the question. Is a very interesting question. And actually, the problem you make a reference to may appear well before we are anywhere near AGI, artificial general intelligence. I mean, it may appear as soon as we have systems that have to make decisions on specific problems, and may even be not very smart systems, not very intelligent, but they just have to decide what to do with, I don't know, health system or a hospital admissions policy or so on. And the question is indeed very good, because we do not have a very clear definition, certainly not a formal definition that a computer can read, of human values, right? So if we start asking questions, we don't have it written because we don't know ourselves, right? What is better, is to let one person die and have 1,000 not lose their jobs? What is the number that will justify a person dying? Is it 10,000? Is it 1 million? How many suicides are we willing to admit to make sure that we save one life? We don't have answers for this, right? So I think what we actually have to do, and this is a proposal that has been made in the AI community, instead of programming a system and letting the system decide then by itself what policies to adopt, we should instruct the systems to ask humans what they think about specific actions. So let's say we are trying to decide whether we should go in lockdown or instead just lock down people that are above, I don't know, 65 years old or something. And then the system can tell us that, well, if we go into lockdown, we'll most likely save these lives, but, you know, we'll have this economic impact. And if we don't go into lockdown, if we take option B, then we have these consequences. And the fact is that when you are weighting very different things, like the number of deaths, the number of suicides, the economic impact, the impact on children that without going to school for a year or so, there is no way we can code this in a closed form in a computer and in a program, not now at least. And I think the most useful proposal to date, which was actually due to Stuart Russell, a well-known researcher in AI that has written a book about this, is, okay, code the procedures and the strategies that the system should pursue, but then have it ask humans whether what they think about it. Do they prefer option A, option B, option C, and keep doing this. Don't assume I mean the system, right? Don't assume you know everything. Every time you arrive at a decision that could be difficult, ask humans. And the idea here is to avoid that nightmare scenario that you're probably aware, where a system that is trying to, I don't know, a system that is trying to stop global warming just decides to kill all the humans, because that will definitely stop global warming. But that was not exactly what we wanted the system to do, right? We wanted the system to do stop global warming without harming anyone, right? Harming as the people as possible. So I think I managed to answer Pedro's question. Is so far we certainly don't have a closed way to create a moral framework in AI systems. They don't need to be AGI systems. And while we don't have that, and I think it'll be for a long time, if humans give feedback to the system that it can improve progressively the framework, the moral framework where it's working on and taking decisions on.
Thank you, Arlindo. Dennis or Lope, would you like to further comment on this? Dennis?
Yeah, I'll comment more broadly. I'll comment, I know we're going to speak in the conference on the ethical dimension more tomorrow, but we've opened that door. So let me speak about two matters with regard to ethics that I think about. First, the obvious ethical issue when it comes to AI is privacy. And so I can track every keystroke my employees touch on their computer, and I have a perfect record of every email, every thought they have sent, and I can go back and analyze it and use that data. What's the ethics of the privacy that's involved? Is it enough to tell people and to warn them that that is the case? I can do facial recognition and have cameras at every part of the campus and follow people. What is the ethics of that? Truthfully, our society has already said fine, because our major cities in the world have cameras everywhere. And so in some ways, this has already been adopted worldwide in all of the major cities. It doesn't mean it solved the ethical issues. So there is a major set of ethical questions around privacy that are worth thinking about at length and how we address them as this gets used. But I have a different thought on the loss of jobs and the adoption of technology, and whether one should be slow to adopt technology because of loss of jobs. Because first of all, that happens in industries all the time, yes? The people who made typewriters have no more jobs. They're gone. The people who made saddles for horses, it's very small now. Industries come, they go. New industries come, they go. And there's very bad times between them and people lose jobs. And I think this is another of those moments. The difference for this moment with AI is the jobs that are going to disappear are white collar jobs. Accountants and auditors, the number of them is going to go way down. In the United States, lawyers, our law schools have 1/2 the applications to become lawyers that they did 15 years ago. It's dropped by 1/2 because we don't need as many lawyers because we can do all the research electronically. And AI is going to, instead of past industries that got rid of blue collar workers, the industry workers, the factory workers, the people on the land, farmers, etc. AI is going to get rid of the white collar, the professional class, and it's going to downsize a number of serious professions in it. And that makes it different. But in the same ways, it's not different compared to what's happened to others. It's a very interesting set of ethical questions and how you adopt the technology, how quickly, and how you make provision for people who are affected by it. But it's going to play out differently with AI than it has in past situations.
Thank you, Dennis. Lope?
Yes, thank you, Pierre. I think Pedro's question is really a key one. And I think any solution we can come up with is fallible, right? No, there is not going to be a perfect solution. And I see Professor Oliveira's point of making human supervised decisions. However, it also is fallible in many situations. In fact, it happens today that complex systems, when they cannot decide by themselves, they give the question to humans, and humans mess it up just because it's so complex, and humans don't have enough information and suffer of a stress. So it's not necessarily a solution. Sometimes there are not even time to do this. So to ask humans. Then there is the issue of singularity. For some, it's just theory and not realistic, but it may happen. So I think coming back to the fact that any solution we can come up with is fallible. I think what we need to do is to make sure that every person in our generation and the generation coming is critical and has been fed with so much, or fed with this spirit of trying to do well. So even if when they make mistakes, because we all the time make mistakes, one thing is infractions, another thing is just making mistakes. It's human error. At least they are trying to do their best. So I think when the programmer is programming, it's going to be at least critical. I might be biased here. Then there is going to be an audit that says if you were biased or not. Yes, but at least from the very beginning, you try not to be, and you try to respect, and not because the law says so, but because you want to. And then when you are analyzing data, you are checking, okay, I'm going to collect these 10 pieces of data. Do I want to collect these pieces of data from the very beginning? And you want to be critical of it. And you want to be able to say it to your boss, and to his boss or her boss, etc. So I think I don't see any other solution really, but coming back to the fundamentals. Every human being able to be critical and being able to be respectful and being fed from the very beginning, from our childhood, with fundamental values can be accepted for all culture. I know it sounds idealistic, but I don't see any other one. any other approach.
Thank you, Lope. Now, ladies and gentlemen from the audience, is there anyone who would like to further comment or raise any question to a member of our panel this afternoon? It seems to be that we don't have so far.
Yeah, I think there is a question from Ordeta in the chat.
Yes. Oh, please, Ordeta. Ordeta, please. I don't know if she can.
Can
Ordeta?
you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
please, Odetta. Yes,
Yeah,
your microphone was not on.
Good evening.
And
Well,
you can also
I
put
think,
your video if you want.
No, I don't have the options.
Oh, okay. Okay. Anyway, we can hear you.
It's okay. It's okay. So I just had a question on if AI will expand the divide between the rich and the poor nations, given that as it stands, you know, some of the back-end work coming from richer countries comes to the poor countries, for example, call center jobs, etc. If that is going to get out, then it's not going to happen. Our economics will go for a 6. Also, the use of AI in education. As it stands now, we are not even able to use, you know, Zoom for our classes, online teaching. It doesn't happen maybe in the big cities, but not in the smaller towns and villages. So will this, my take is it will, but I just want to have from the panelists, will it, you know, make the divide bigger between the rich and the poor nations?
Thank you very much, Odetta. That is definitely a key question. For instance, with the eruption of this pandemic, suddenly we realized in our university here in the UC Louvain, the number of students who simply had no access either to internet or simply they did not have a personal computer. So the university had to react extremely quickly to provide this kind of thing. But this is just one element. Could any one of you provide some answer to Odetta, please? I don't know, Lope or Denise or Arlindo?
Maybe from the point of view of Colombia, I can understand this concern. We have lived, and it has been really hard on us, all this situation. But it was hard before. And Javeriana University is a university that is expensive within the country. And we have all these kind of programs to try to help. And artificial intelligence actually can come handy to solve some of these issues. In fact, many people who don't have computing power now, because of the technologies we have, now they have it, and so on. So there are ways to try to use these technologies to reduce the gap. Nevertheless, what I feel is happening and the world is going towards is in the opposite direction. So I'm not a sociologist, but I cannot stop thinking that when the United States, for example, is thinking of artificial intelligence, investing millions and millions for all sectors, and when China is doing the same and Europe is doing the same, in their own ways of thinking, they're all thinking how I improve myself. And of course, maybe I can import part of this technology and I will do it for a price. And perhaps I can even import values. You know the white paper of the European Union says, we have this set of values and we want to import them. These are good values, I have to say. They were written down, but still feels a little bit like this colonizing view that I have the truth and then I send it everywhere else. And it doesn't sound right to me, even if they are good values. But someone could say the opposite. So what we supposed to do? So Lope, propose something that we're supposed to do. Oh, I think dialogue and conversations and negotiation and I don't know. I think this at the end is everyone is looking to take care of their own people as if there were not other people, and that is probably gonna amplify the gap.
So I will add.
Yes, please, Dennis.
Today of all days, it's an interesting day to ask your question, because a few hours ago, a rocket was launched with 60 satellites in one rocket, 60 satellites in one rocket, with the purpose of expanding internet access across the world. And that's the SpaceX program. And to the degree that we can get internet fully across the world and all reaches, I believe that can be a good thing when it comes to being able to break down some of the differences in territory and educational opportunity. But without question, I think those who invest in these technologies are going to try to become wealthy themselves. And I am certainly watching, and I know you are as well, how few individuals now control how much world wealth. Mm-hmm. It used to be the question was how much each nation controlled of the world's wealth. But the question has now shifted to individuals. And what is the 1% or even less than 1% control of the vast world's wealth? And I do think this will continue that pattern rather than lessen it.
Thank you, Denis. Arlindo?
If I may add, I think the jury is still out on this one. On one hand, there are clearly strong risks that the concentration of economic power, and not only economic, will be in the companies in the richer countries and the individuals in the richer countries. But on the other, and that is a risk, of course, but there is also, the AI also opens new opportunities for everyone around the world. I mean, having healthcare more available, having education much more available, having the ability with cell phones and digital communications, the ability for anyone to start a business virtually anywhere in the world, even in the middle of Africa. So it's difficult. I think it depends a lot on us, what we define as social policies and economic redistribution policies. It will fall on us, the decisions to make sure that AI will contribute to evening out the differences between the rich world and the less developed world, and not increasing those differences. But I think it will depend critically on how we as a society address the regulatory issues and the legal issues that control these technologies. Because without appropriate regulation and without appropriate legislation, certainly we'll have the privacy issues that were referred, we'll have concentration of power, we have monopolies in some areas, and that will tend to contribute to a more significant asymmetry between the rich and the poor world.
Thank you, Arlindo. But I was just surprised by an aspect about this COVID crisis, and it was a testimony from a Brazilian colleague in Belo Horizonte, and he was amazed to see the difference in healthcare and where AI was definitely rushing to the richer hospitals rather to the poorer ones, and the availability of instruments to cure or just to manage the crisis for the rich on the one hand and the poorer on the one hand. And the gap seemed to be raising, which was a major issue in Brazil. So in a sense, I can easily follow Denis' comment about the potential availability about internet and knowledge society. But on the other hand, there are fields where definitely it seems to be that AI seems to be more dedicated to some welfare rather than to more of the population. Is there any further comment or any question from the audience, please?
There is one more question from in the chat.
Yes, please.
From Bill Hesselberger, I think.
Oh, where do we have it?
We have it in the chat. It's
yes, okay.
Right?
I'm just trying to get it from. I've let me see. Is it possible to see? Oh no.
The last one. It said,
please, because I can't read it from here.
I can just ask the question.
Please. Oh yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe Pedro. Please.
Okay. Yes, this is William Hasselberger.
Oh, sorry, but because the name is John Pedro. So
yes, for some reason, some
you're
mysterious.
His brother, probably.
Yes, that's right. AI is trying to confuse us here. Well, it's very nice. I'm happy to be here, and I'm sorry I have to dip between this conference and another one, which overlaps, unfortunately, on these very same days with my program. But I'm very excited to be participating in this conference, and I just had a couple thoughts based on the very interesting talks given by the panelists. And I guess the point at which we can enter this, the question that I have is the suggestion from Professor Oliveira, drawing on Stuart Russell, is this famous suggestion of keeping humans in the loop in AI decisions and having AIs present human beings with a range of options, but not actually autonomously taking decisions on behalf of us in morally sensitive areas. And I think there's a lot to recommend this idea, but it's worth keeping in mind two features of our contemporary situation. One is that, as philosophers like Charles Taylor or Alistair McIntyre have pointed out, we live in a situation of what you might call moral fragmentation, in the sense that the sources of our moral norms and our criteria for making practical decisions are themselves plural and not obviously commensurable. So we have, on the one hand, like utilitarian decision-making, British utilitarian maximizing decision-making. Then we have Kantian rights-based decision-making. Then we have more Catholic, virtue ethical kind of decision-making. And it's not, we have all these different sources of norms for moral judgment and choice. And it's, how to balance them off one another is really delicate and unclear. But then on the other hand, I think another thing that is even more thorny and worth thinking about in this conference is a psychological aspect of human beings that I think has been well documented in the literature, which is something called algorithmic bias. So this is the idea that we tend to be biased in favor of the suggestions made by algorithms and AI, even against our own intuitions and against evidence that suggests that we should be hesitant. So there are cases in the US of using the Compass algorithm in courts, an AI-derived algorithm to help us make decisions in courtrooms, judges to make decisions in courtrooms. And judges have gone with the decisions of this algorithm over the agreements made between the human defense team and the human prosecutor team. And of course, they don't understand why the AI is making that choice. It's a machine learning AI. So we're biased. We think that the computer must be right because it's so sharp and advanced and so forth. So I think that algorithmic bias is something we need to definitely teach ourselves and our children to be aware of, that we don't just go with the machine because it's what the machine said, and try to understand the reasoning in play and so forth. But thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, William. That is definitely food for thought. Would anyone like to react first? I don't know if Lope, Denise, or Arlindo. Because
no,
definitely,
I'll simply add there are many
Please.
examples of that algorithmic bias that have come to the fore in the literature lately. It's a genuine problem.
And in a sense, it just reacted to Arlindo's first answer to the first question about getting responsibility back. Arlindo?
So let me maybe just going to say, you made actually two very good and independent comments, right? The first one is making moral decisions is very, very difficult, even for humans, even for knowledgeable humans that know the ethical issues, right? And the second, okay, let me take this one. And there, I'm afraid that AI cannot really help us. I mean, we are definitely not enough advanced in AI technology to help us there. Maybe a long time in the future, some AI system will be able to make a synthesis of these different ethical and moral values and create some framework that we'll all be able to live with. I think it's very unlikely, but maybe sometime in the very distant future. For now, I think we have to live with what we have now, as you described very well. And it is there that I believe that Stuart Russell's proposal has some value, which is instead of trying to code this extremely complex and poorly understood set of values that guide us, Instead, try at least to make sure that the system will not make their own stupid decisions based on something stupid someone said at coding time or specification time or so on. So I think, of course, Stuart Russell's solution is not a panacea, because lots of problems will happen. We don't know. Maybe the program will ask a question every second, or maybe will ask questions that we don't know how to answer. But I think it's still, in general, a good idea. As for the second one, the algorithmic biasing, it's a problem. But I like to remind people, it's not a problem with AI. It's a problem with humans, right? We humans create the problems. The systems that we have today, they learn from human decisions, and they reproduce very accurately the human decisions and the human biases. So the problem there, we can actually, the systems even help us a little bit, because when the systems start being biased, it's easier for us to tell that the systems are biased than to tell that the humans are biased, just because of practical reasons, because we can analyze how the system does in 1,000 cases or so on. So I think the algorithmic bias is raised as a problem caused by AI, but I tend to disagree. I think algorithmic bias is a problem with human decisions that the machines learn to emulate and reproduce. So of course we have to take this on the machine side. We have to make sure that every time this happens, the machine or someone can detect it and correct it. But most of all, we have to address the problem at its source. We have to address the problem of the data set that was used to train the system, of the humans that created the data set, and that led to the algorithmic biases that we observe. I think it's a real problem, but it's not a problem caused by machines. It's a problem caused by humans and made visible by machines.
I think a very good recent example comes from Amazon itself, Amazon.com, the procurement site. And they created an AI solution for their hiring that could scan everyone's electronic application for the backgrounds and the human characteristics that their employees had told them would be important. And they used their employees to tell them what would be important. But then they discovered that many of the employees that did that were male. They were actually contributing characteristics that were important to them. And then Amazon discovered that they were hiring many, many more men because they had gotten their sampling wrong to start. And so it is not a problem of the machine, as you say, but it is a problem from humans, but it is a problem for humans because AI is a black box and we don't see what it's doing until we see later on the effect. So it is I think this is a good point.
Thank you very much. Gradually, we are nearing the end of our panel, but I just would like to mention two questions, just maybe not possible to be answered this afternoon because we are running out of time, but I think they are essential. The first is coming from Yves Poulet, former rector from the University of Namur in Belgium. And he wrote, "At my opinion, universities are a place of freedom. What you are describing seems the contrary of that, tracking people, profiling them." That is an issue. The other one is from the Johan de Tavernier. And his question is there a need for AI ethics to pay attention to specific governmental policies and legislation? So these are two further topics which are going to need to be further addressed. Maybe not this afternoon, but we need to keep that in mind, definitely. Isabel, I'm turning to you now, please. But first of all, I would like to give a warm thank you to the three panelists of this afternoon for their very thoughtful and very food-for-thought presentation. Lope, Arlindo, Dennis, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel, please. You need to put on, yes, your microphone.
To unmute my video, my mic. So thank you for all three speakers. It was truly an incredible start. Lots of food for thought that we hope that not that we can solve, that we can continue to learn together and find good solutions, or at least good experiences that can allow us to think back into our practices and see how those practices, the ethical issues that come out as a result of those practices as well. And now I'm not sure whether we already have Panch.
Yes, I am here.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay, that is.
So
I'm very glad to welcome Dr. Sethuraman Ponchanathan.
Yes,
it is my privilege to introduce you. The Honorable Sethuraman Ponchanathan is a computer scientist and engineer, and the 15th director of the U.S. National Science Foundation. The NSF is an $8.3 billion independent federal agency and the only government agency charged with advancing all fields of scientific discovery, technological innovation, and STEM education. Dr. Ponchanathan has a distinguished career in science, technology, engineering, and education that spans more than 3 decades. He served as executive vice president of the Arizona State University Knowledge Enterprise, where he also founded the Center for Cognitive Ubiquitous Computing. Prior to becoming director of NSF, Dr. Ponchanathan served on the National Science Board for 6 years and also served on and chaired numerous high-level research and innovation organizations. He's a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and other prestigious science and engineering organizations. Dr. Ponchanathan's scientific contributions have advanced the areas of human-centered multimedia computing, haptic user interface, person-centered ubiquitous computing technologies for empowering individuals with a range of abilities. Definitely, after the panel we had this afternoon, we are looking forward to listening to what you have to say, Dr. Ponchanathan. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Pierre, and thank you, Isabel, for inviting me to do this talk. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you. You're having an excellent discussion. I caught some few things at the end of your past conversation that communicates to me the importance of the human element and how that's going to, make or break the success of AI almost. And you're all on the same page on that one. So what I thought I will do, I have 15 minutes. I was just going to talk about the AI work that NSF is spearheading primarily, and a little bit context to NSF, before I get into the AI discussion itself, if that's okay with you all. So are you all able to hear me well? Okay.
Yes, good. Please. We can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. So I'm going to start with the mission of NSF because you may or may not be familiar with this. I'm just going to quickly orient you to that. There are 3 component parts of NSF: promoting the progress of science, advancing the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and securing the national defense. That essentially is the mission of NSF in a succinct form that has been advancing for the last 7 decades since its founding by this visionary leader after World War II, Vannevar Bush, who conceptualized how the nation needed an agency that would fund high-risk, high-reward research that would see growth across the entire US enterprise and keep us in the vanguard. Over the 7 decades, much has happened, and this is relevant to AI. And I want to tell you that when people talk about AI, there is the mistaken notion that somehow AI happened in the last decade. Not at all. AI's work has been in place for the last 7 decades, 5 decades. That's where we are now. And this is something that I'm trying to make sure that our colleagues, our policymakers, our partners understand. Because when we talk about the importance of fundamental research, curiosity-driven research, discovery research, it's exceedingly important to put this in context. I have tremendous partnerships that I'm establishing across the globe. I had a great conversation with Arlindo UKRI, Mark Ferguson at SFI, and Alejandro Adam in Canada, Mona Niemer in Canada, and in New Zealand. And this afternoon I'm having lunch. I'm running to lunch with the Italian ambassador because I believe that this is something that is global in terms of the progress that has been made over the 7 decades. So you hear sampling of the 7 decades of advancement of what has happened at NSF. Even if you look at the 90s, for example, as one example of this 7 decades of performance, Google would not be here but for the Digital Libraries project that was funded by NSF to 2 young aspirants. Qualcomm would not be there if we didn't fund the SBIR program as it is today. I would venture to say and be bold enough to say. So that's what curiosity-driven research, discovery-based research, agencies like NSF do to advance science and technology into the future. And so when you take this history, always history is a good indication of understanding how the future evolves. So I've laid out a vision for NSF, and AI is front and center in that vision, and you will see why. The 3 pillars that I've outlined are how do you advance I'm just going to come back to this, sorry about that. I moved a little bit faster here, and okay, here you go. The 3 pillars are advancing the frontiers of research into the future, ensuring accessibility and inclusivity, and securing global leadership through a partnership foundation, and that's why I'm talking to all of you. This cannot be done without partnership in every form and every mode and every type, with a sort of an interspersion of or a spirit of innovation that binds everything that we do. The middle pillar is exceedingly important. We need to ensure accessibility and inclusivity. We cannot and should not and must not continue this progress of the haves and the have-nots having access to scientific progress and scientific talent being nurtured through that. So when we talk about advancing the frontiers of science, I have this following vision for NSF. How do we strengthen at speed and at scale? And top left, curiosity-driven research is a bedrock of what NSF does. How new emerging opportunities can, like COVID, has brought to the front, how can we address challenges through technologies like AI? How can we have research centers across the nation, bringing partnership not only between researchers in the nation, working with industry and other partners, but across the globe. AI in every state. This conceptualization that I'm talking about is AI cannot be for a limited few or a limited part of the geography of this great nation. It's got to be in every part of this great nation. And so I've asked how the AI programs that we are putting in place are going to essentially result in unleashing ideas and talent across the broad socioeconomic, demographic, and the geographical diversity of this great nation. I'm going to jump a few of those and come to learning everywhere. If something is demonstrated that AI and automated tutoring systems and learning systems that has been worked on for many, many decades are now realizing their potential and promise, it's now. We have all pivoted to learning through remote means, working through remote means because of the pandemic. But that also has now presented us this opportunity of not only connecting talent and ideas everywhere across the globe, including the conversations that we're having so easily right now. Would I fly for a 15-minute conversation with this group? Something to think about. That we are making possible things that would never been thought of as elegant or as efficient or even as possible because of where we are with the technologies of AI and other computing and other technologies, including social behavioral sciences and other technologies converging and making possible. The key here is fusion. AI is made possible because of fusion of many things coming together. AI will achieve its fullest potential if and only if the fusion of different technologies and different scientific aspirations and different ideas are brought together. What do I mean by that? So as we move into the future, the frontiers of science, let me talk about the AI focus areas that we are considering quite actively at NSF. We are looking at human AI interaction collaboration. We are looking at advances in optimization. We are looking at AI and advanced cyber infrastructure. We're looking at advances in AI and computer network system. We are looking at dynamic systems. We are looking at AI augmented learning. We are looking at AI to advance biology. we are looking at even AI-driven innovation in agriculture and food system. This is just sampling. This is not everything. And this is possible because of the partnerships that we are engaging at full scope and full scale and full intensity. Can you imagine our partnership with the US Department of Agriculture, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, essentially made possible 2 new AI institutes. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The Google, Accenture, Intel, Amazon, I heard Amazon at the end of the previous conversation. All of these partnerships is making possible new vistas that we can explore because of the interest with industry, Homeland Security, Department of Transportation, and a host of other partnerships. Let me talk about the AI institutes we just launched. We launched for $100 million price tag. We launched the NSF AI Institute for research in trustworthy AI in weather, climate, and coastal oceanography. We launched an NSF AI Institute for foundations of machine learning because we need to understand the fundamental aspects of computing, AI, machine learning, and others in order to build better applications. But it is not just that. How might the applications challenge fundamental problems being uncovered in computing and AI and machine learning to build better algorithms, better ideas, and better solutions, and better AI approaches. We launched an NSF AI Institute for student learning, augmented learning at the University of Colorado Boulder. These are each $20 million scale projects. NSF AI for molecular machinery, synthetic strategy and manufacturing at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. NSF AI Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Fundamental Interactions at MIT. So these are AI institutes that we launched from NSF, the 5 of them, but we didn't stop there. In addition to the 5 institutes, we also partnered with, as I said, National Institute for Food and Agriculture, and launched 2 AI institutes focused on agriculture, next generation of food systems, the future of agricultural resilience, management, and sustainability. And the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign project is in partnership with companies like John Deere. These are not companies that you would think of when you think of AI. You think of typically universities that are more partnering with Google and Amazon and others. But we are breaking the mold of this traditional thinking in terms of what we might do with AI in new vistas and pre-wire partnerships to unleash the potential and promise of an AI, but more importantly, challenge AI to be able to deliver the goods, whether it is privacy, whether it is security, whether it is ethical, whether it is a better social behavioral frameworks that needs to be worked with in order to deliver better outcomes. I'm glad to report the first 7 institutes that we launched with $140 million, $100 million from NSF, $40 million from NIFA, touches 20 different states of the United States. 20 different states being touched with partnerships across the nation. I have challenged the agency that with the next 8 institutes that we are launching right now, and I will talk about that in a minute, that we will touch all 50 states of the United States. There shall not be any state left behind. There is room for challenging ourselves to get K-12 talent inspired, community college talent inspired, 4-year college talent inspired, research university talent and ideas inspired, industry interactions inspired, city, state, and other local governments and their problem-solving aspirations realized through these partnerships. So in the next 8 calls, we actually have Amazon, Google, Accenture as explicit partners, where they are bringing in $20 million that makes possible 1 extra institute even. So we are now launching 8 institutes at $160 million scale. Right now, the call is out. All of these are ripe for partnerships across the globe. So I would strongly encourage all of you as partners, think about how we might link up and do better with partnerships. Because these are global scale problems, global scale solutions are needed, global scale partnerships, therefore, are the only way it's going to make happen. So the 2020 AI Institutes will focus on the following 8 thematic areas: human AI interaction and collaboration, as I said, advances in optimization, AI and advanced cyber infrastructure. And I talked about this list earlier. These are 2021 focus areas in addition to the 2020 focus areas. So this is just the beginning. We are now unleashing the power and the potential of AI talent through partnerships, as I talked about, but partnerships beyond the traditional partnerships that we talked about. Partnerships in every form, every type, every mode, inside the agency and through the agency work that we are partnering with every agency across the nation and across the globe. Already I'm talking to UKRI and others in terms of what we might do around this concept of AI with Canada, with New Zealand and others, what we might do in terms of partnership in the area of AI. At the end of the day, the partnership is going to inspire people and talent. This is the way we are going to have sustained AI progress. Sustained AI progress will not happen unless there's a commitment to training of talent at all levels so that new ideas for the future comes about. And it also is made possible because AI translation into areas like we talked about, agriculture, AI into transportation. These are going to now challenge us in AI to do even more in terms of understanding the unsolved problems that needs to be unleashed so that we might then find solutions to them so that AI can holistically solve the problems for the future. Otherwise, it will be unrealized promise, unrealized potential. And it'll end up being a hype more than reality that impacts every aspect and segment of our society if it does not uplift the talent in the socioeconomic demographic and the geographic diversity of the globe, and in our case, the nation of the United States. It would have failed in its promise. It would have failed in its potential. And so I'm looking at the NSF and I'm challenging ourselves. Are we thinking innovatively? Are we holding ourselves accountable through data and analytics in terms of progress? Are we partnering in global terms through a collective leadership aspiration, through values, through aspirations, through openness, through transparency, through reciprocity and others? Are we planning for the infrastructure of the future? Are we strategically thinking about this every day, not every 3 years? Are we keeping the human element central and core to our thinking? Are we now going and talking about this and outreaching everywhere so that we might get the support that is needed to be able to build bigger and scaled futures? How can we strengthen at speed and scale? And that's what this is about. And so we need help. And the help has to come in terms of partnering on a strategic vision, growing through teamwork, building partnerships, leveraging the power of networks, scaling the change rapidly, and be advocates. And that's what this is about. And you are just yet another partner. And how might NSF and the partnership work even more to unleash better futures for all the constituencies that we are thinking about together? And so I leave you with those thoughts. In a 15-minute capsule, I could only rush through and talk about a very small glimpse, and hopefully that is useful to you. And as a new director of the Natural Science Foundation, the next 6 years, I endeavor to see how we can advance NSF in ways that unleashes the talent and potential across the globe through the talent and potential that gets inspired across this great nation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panchanathan. That is definitely a very thoughtful presentation you made, and especially with a multidimensional challenge that you presented. In your introduction, you raised at least two issues, the issues of availability and the issue of accessibility. In your presentation, definitely you presented two basic agenda, a research agenda and an educational agenda. But through the issue of availability and accessibility, this also raises the questions of the future obstacles to be overcome in order to move forward with these things. But once again, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Panchanathan.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I look forward to working with all of you in some form in the future. And thank you again, Pierre, to your invitation and Isabel's invitation. Have a wonderful rest of the conference. Goodbye.